Smith.
All right, thank you, Belle. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our September committee meeting for policy and funding. My name is Rebecca Smith, and I am the chair of this committee and the vice chair for the Commission for Arts and Culture. I will be referring to notes since this is an official public meeting. Off to the side here, we do have particular protocols for these virtual meetings, and we want to make sure that we're ensuring transparency and access for our community. So again, just want to make sure that I am following those protocols. I do want to ask everyone to keep their videos on. However, do keep your microphones muted during the meeting. And we'll ask the same of our staff members as well. So time for a quick roll call of our commissioner attendance. When I call your name, I'm just going to be looking around my Zoom room here. Please unmute yourself and simply say present. Commissioner Hughes.
Present.
Thank you. Good to see you again. We do not have Commissioner Polito with us. Commissioner DeZenzo.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Martin.
Present.
Thank you. And looking forward to actually connecting with you one of these days. Thank you, Commissioner Martin, for joining us. And Commissioner Kim.
Present.
Hello, friend. Good to see you. All right. So your attendance has been noted. Also joining us is our city staff extraordinaire. We have Belle Reza, Christine Jones, and Jonathan Gless, and we'll be hearing from our city staff in a few moments as well. And in doing so, before we get into the agenda, I will ask Belle to review the guidelines with us for today's virtual meeting. Thank you, Belle.
Hello, commissioners. Just a quick little refresher. We are conducting this meeting as a Zoom webinar. That is to provide greater accessibility to the public who can now join this meeting in real time and provide virtual non-agenda comment. The meeting for you, however, will be identical to a typical Zoom meeting. Just please remember to keep your camera on, your microphone muted, and unmute yourself when you're going to speak. Please do not use the hand raising function. Use the chat window when you would like to signal when you'd like to speak, and Commissioner Chair Smith will call on you in the order received. This is in order to comply with Brown Act. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We are now moving on to non-agenda public comment. The public was invited to submit public comment on our agenda and non-agenda items via a web form accessible through the agenda and our commission's website. So members of the public can also join this meeting as webinar attendees. If any of the public has submitted comments, then Belle will read those public comments aloud. And so calling on you now, Belle, to see if we have any public comments submitted.
Thank you. Nothing was submitted in writing, and there are no members of the public in attendance at this meeting.
Okay. Probably staying out of the rain. We are now very quickly on our chair's report. And since we have not met in a while, we do not have any commission business as of today. We did meet as an executive committee this morning, so I get to turn this over as this meeting to someone with the coolest, I think one of the coolest titles at the city, Christine Jones, who is the director of Civic Arts Strategies, right? And she will be presenting our administrative updates for the fiscal year funding cycle.
Thank you, Chair Smith. It's nice to see everybody. I know this committee, it's been a little while, so it's nice to see everybody in the room, so to speak. So let's go to the next slide. So as Chair Smith indicated, staff today will be kind of updating you on our ongoing efforts to improve the city's arts and culture funding program. And specifically today, I'll be providing some administrative updates for the fiscal year 2024. It's hard to believe we're there, but it's going to be upcoming fiscal year 2024 funding cycle for Organizational Support Program and Creative Communities San Diego. So let's go to the next slide. So this slide you'll see really outlines our general timeline for upcoming fiscal year 2024 funding cycle. And this again is specific to our Organizational Support Program, which we call OSP, and Creative Communities San Diego, which we often refer to as CCSD, and gives you an idea of what to expect. And it looks at cities' work over the upcoming months. So for those of the committee members who are new, just we're already kind of gearing up again for fiscal year 2024. That means that recipients of funding would actually have a grant activity period starting July 1st of 2023. So we do work far ahead in order to prepare for the next fiscal year, if that makes sense. And happy to answer any more questions on that as we go. What I also want to note here is that staff is currently preparing the application and the guidelines, which we do in the summer every year. We anticipate the release of the guidelines later this month, and particularly the RFQ, which we often call part 1 as well. And then really after that is our time as city staff to really review applications. There's a cure period, which I'll explain a little bit more, but that's really where we support applicants in any corrections they need to make to their application or any clarifications we need from them. And then we issue the RFP or a part 2 of the process later in the early winter typically. So you'll see here, that's just our general timeline. So let's go to the next slide. So kind of drilling down a little bit on some of the things that city is kind of busy working on now, which again is really preparation for the guidelines. So as I mentioned, those will be released later this month. And that is really something that everything's connected to them in some ways. We typically will do yearly updates and just review the guidelines and make general administrative updates. We'll implement key changes. Like this year, you'll see here, the new is that we're looking at replacement of Luna, which I'll expand on a little bit more and tell you a little bit more about what actually that is for those of you who don't know. In addition to those types of key changes, we do review the guidelines with great intentionality toward our DEI work and really looking at ways to create refinements to reduce redundancies, make things easier to read and understand for applicants. Certainly our goal is really to only ask for information that actually is needed and will be used as part of the application and review process. So ultimately, any updates that we make, our aim is to benefit all applicants and hopefully make the application process easier and streamlined for applicants as we move forward. So in addition, one of the things that we instituted last year, we're going to be working on again, which is cultivating a resource list of fiscal sponsors. So this is a list of pre-qualified fiscal sponsors that applicants to Creative Communities San Diego can potentially use. They don't have to use, but it does give them a resource to consider and contact for fiscal sponsors should they need one. If they're not a 501c3 or C6 and they're a not-for-profit, they could work with a fiscal sponsor. So we did introduce that last year. Many of the applicants did utilize that resource list. So we are in the process right now of doing a call for fiscal sponsors for FY24. We'll put that list together and provide that to CCSD applicants later this month. So for now, what we'd love you to do is to help us get the word out. So the deadline for the fiscal sponsor applications, which is super easy for fiscal sponsors to submit, is on our website. I'll provide the link after the presentation today. If you know of organizations that might have the capacity to do that, I would highly encourage you to share that with them, and we're happy to answer any questions they may have. So another big part of what we do every year is the technical assistance. So we, in addition to the fiscal sponsor resource list, we do provide a workshop for CCSD applicants that want to better understand what is fiscal sponsorship, making sure that they are aware of the resource list, asking questions, and just generally supporting them in that process. So that will typically happen toward the beginning of after our release of guidelines for any applicants interested in learning more about that. And obviously tied to technical assistance is cultivation of new applicants. So we really are continuing this year to expand our network of partners in the community. Within the city, we are collaborating and want to grow our reach, particularly with some of the mayoral boards and advisory groups. such as the Mayor's Black Advisory Group, the Asian Pacific Islander Advisory Group, the Latinx Advisory Group, the LGBTQ Advisory Group. We also find that chambers of commerce are really great to outreach to help them look for those new candidates and organizations. So we really also reach out to community neighborhood groups and certainly want all of you to help with that cultivation as well. Certainly our hope in the collaboration is to tap new groups, new organizations, new interests, share the opportunity to encourage applicants and cultivate them to apply for funding, whether it's OSP funding or it's CCSD funding. We can help guide applicants as to what the best funding category is for their specific needs. Staff expects to be doing a significant amount of time on the outreach efforts this year, as well as really individual targeted outreach. So what we do is we look for all the applicants that start an application and then they didn't end up actually submitting that application. So we really make a targeted outreach to them, understanding like why they didn't finish the application, or do they need support in completing an application this year? So we'll be doing that targeted outreach as well. We did see a lot of positive partnerships last year and last few years really, and the importance of engaging with city council members as well. So our plan once again is to co-host workshops with the council members. So one in each council district. So there's 9 council districts right now. So we typically will do that during the live part 1 or RFQ phase. So having those kind of introductory workshops, which a council member would help with the recruitment of people interested and wanting to learn more about the city's arts and culture funding program, and particularly the funding opportunities. And then as I shared, September is really our target month for release of the guidelines and specifically the part 1, the RFQ. We don't have a specific date. It will be toward the end of the month. We're just working out those details right now. City staff also plans to do technical assistant workshops to assist people with how to apply to the part 1 RFQ session during the open application period. We'll be doing one-on-one consultations as we do in office hours. So last year, I think throughout the cycle, we offered over 64 hours of one-on-one consultations with applicants. Hope to provide the same or more this year. Our consultations keep going up every year in terms of that individual time and dedication, but we actually find it really important and something that we're very keen on continuing. So in fall of 2020, you're going to see the core of our RFQ period and also our cure period. So staff really anticipates a lot of individual support of organizations as they're ready to submit their application to the city. In addition, staff will be working on program design for funding categories that were approved under Council Policy 100-03 changes last fall. Many of you may remember, and for new commissioners, we had a lot of policy changes last year that are positively impacting our funding program. And one of those changes was introducing 2 new funding categories, city artist and a category called impact. So right now staff is looking at the viability of launching one of those new funding categories for FY24. So our plan is to update you later this calendar year and just kind of let you know where we are with that and whether the viability is going to be possible. In addition to that kind of ongoing work we're doing, we're also conducting research on allocation models for future funding cycles. So the actual allocation of funds and how that is done. So this ongoing research really is focused on allocation methods specifically for general operational support and really the use of annual operating income versus annual operating expenses as one of the 4 factors in the award allocation calculations. So we're not prepared to make any shifts in our allocation models for FY24. This research is going to take a little bit more time. We're doing some national benchmarking, doing some best practice analysis, looking at our peers across the country. We do anticipate continuing this work well into 2023 and should be ready to come back to you with some conclusions from the research and some suggestions and timing for planning for FY24 funding cycle. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I said I was going to come back to Luna. So really the key change, the key change this year that we want to focus on is replacing the Luna calculation. And specifically, this is in the RFQ or the part 1 of the application that organizations use to apply to the city for funding. So the Luna calculation, first of all, what is the Luna? For those of you who don't know, and many people don't, so no judgment. Luna basically means liquid unrestricted net assets. And it's essentially the estimated amount of unrestricted net assets that is liquid and available to pay the bills. So the Luna monthly liquidity ratio compares liquidity to your expected monthly expenses. So essentially it's the number of months you can operate without receiving any new revenue or contributions. So this Luna calculation was introduced by city staff back in FY18. And it was introduced specifically in the financial management section of both the organizational support program and Creative Community San Diego applications. It's a calculation that was introduced at the time as a way to evaluate the fiscal health of an organization that was applying for funding. And it was to help gauge whether the applicant was ready to hold a contract for services with the city. So what we have found since the introduction of Luna is that it hasn't been as helpful to us as grant makers. And so by and large, this part of the application has been an administrative challenge, particularly for smaller organizations. And it's not a true picture of the fiscal health, particularly for larger organizations, because many of those have fixed assets such as real property or collections. In the past, staff would typically outsource the evaluation of this Luna calculation to the nonprofit institute at the University of San Diego. They would in turn review that calculation to help determine whether an organization was fiscally healthy. But they were looking at specifically from did they do the calculation correct and do they have liquidity? And not from the grant maker's perspective. So we often had to go back and review what they did and then kind of look at it from a grant maker's perspective as well. So year after year since FY18, we've had a quarter to over half of organizations that typically get the calculation wrong in their application. This did require considerable time on the part of the applicant and city staff during the cure period to essentially fix or make corrections to the calculation. One of the things to keep in mind is last year we shifted kind of how the city identifies OSP and CCSD organizations. So we moved away from the concept that organizations provide services to the city, and instead these are funding recipients and they are receiving financial assistance from the city through these funding categories. So while in certain ways it might seem like a semantic change, it really was key and is key in defining the relationship between the city and these funding recipients. And it's an important factor that we're really considering in reducing barriers for applicants in our process. So as an important example of these efforts to really try to reduce these barriers, and honestly with this one, a frustration too on the part of applicants, is that we will be eliminating the Luna calculation requirement in the financial management section of the RFQ application for both funding categories, as we no longer believe it is a useful tool in the application itself. This is something staff's been working on for a number of months. Over the years, funding recipients, as I have shared, that the Luna requirement is a significant source of frustration during the application process, and particularly for these smaller organizations and all volunteer organizations. They often are discouraged from even applying for funding because of this calculation. So the elimination of Luna, we also really see it removes a lot of time consuming back and forth between organizations during the cure period too. So we would predict that our cure period will be more focused on other things and much more less anxiety ridden, I would guess, than many of the organizations that do have to make clarifications in their applications for us. So our intent is really to internally review the Luna requirement. And really, we did review that based on best practices. And that was really, again, to ensure that we're following best practices amongst other peers, state and local funders like the CAC and NEA. So our plan is really to replace Luna with something that's simple, a simple table that requires organizations to enter their organization's total revenues, total expenses for each of the last completed fiscal years, as well as list the organization's surplus or their deficit from those fiscal years. So this will provide an overall financial snapshot of an organization without the overcomplicated calculations. We certainly are also going to continue to require submission of financial documentation to kind of back up that information. So current board approved annual operating budget, balance sheets or financial profit and loss statements. And then we'll be asking questions as we do typically to explain whether there's any significant budget variances and just better understanding the overall activities of that particular organization. Let's go to the next slide. Kamal, I see that you have a question. I'm happy to answer a question.
Thank you. Let me see if I can take this hand down right quick. There we go. One comment, I love the fact that you're getting rid of Luna. It kicked my butt last year. And if it wasn't for Diana walking me through it multiple times, there's no way I would have got across the finish line. And I'm pretty good with numbers. Like I'm not the best, but I'm not the worst either. So that's really great to hear. I also think it's important to keep in mind, you know, I was applying with a fiscal sponsor, and for organizations who are fiscal sponsors, I begin to question like the intent of these questions themselves and like that path and process of inquiry, because if you have to apply with a fiscal sponsor, it's most likely that there really is no fiscal health for the organization, right? Like there is no revenue, there is no surplus. It's people doing work when they can, and the extent to which the process becomes so onerous that people can no longer apply or choose to just kind of opt out before they even take that step. It seems like anything and everything that we can do to prevent the process from becoming a path towards fiscal health would be important. So even table while
I'm
I
not sure.
to continue to think more critically what
I'm sorry, Kamal. I couldn't hear you. I don't know if anybody else had that problem.
Yeah, you're cutting out, Kamal.
Can you try again?
Please.
there
There he is.
My internet's getting, you hear me now? Maybe I'll sometimes turn off the video.
That might work.
I just wanted to make sure that we're doing everything we can to remove as many barriers as possible. And even the inclusion of an expense and revenue tool to us as the grant making entity. So what are we really trying to get at? Because a number of organizations won't really have much to offer there either. And really all getting is a picture of the financial health of the fiscally sponsoring entity in those cases. So I think that's just something to keep in mind as we're trying to figure out more ways to bring smaller organizations and or individual entities, you know, who are organizations of one into the space as well, and everything we can do to think with a trust-based philanthropic hat as a entity.
Thank you so much, Kamal. Certainly our aim is to try to reduce barriers as much as possible. So we'll definitely take that feedback back. And I'm happy to hear that you're supportive of the removal of the Luna calculation. So I'm going to go on to the next item, and then we can have a further discussion or any happy to answer any questions. So the other item that we're really focused on this year is working on better supporting or increasing stipends specifically for prospective panelists that serve on the review panels for the funding program. So as many of you know, for both CCSD and OSP, we have panelists that come from various arts and field backgrounds. Their focus is on reviewing, assessing, and scoring funding applications for either OSP or CCSD. These are panelists that take the time to read a certain number of applications and then participate in meetings to then dialogue and score applicants. And then those ranks, as they always do, come to this body as well as the full Commission for Arts and Culture for recommendation. So we introduced back in FY22 a stipend, and that was based and drilled into based on DEI work we've done, and also creating greater equity and creating more voices and inclusivity in order to support these people to be able to participate in these panel conversations. So what we want to do this year is we want to increase that panel stipend. We think that is needed for FY 2024 to, again, create and encourage that more inclusive participation, particularly on the part of self-employed and individual workers who are different in terms of how they work and don't have, maybe a company or somebody who's supportive of them participating and still being paid in our type of work. So, and also we'll hopefully encourage other cultural workers and other artists who don't have conflicts of interest to participate. So what we heard was our stipends were low. And so that was a reason in the past some people weren't able to participate and just couldn't give us that time, because oftentimes they're either a full panel meeting or a half day. So, we recognize that. So we did a little looking, and our intent is to basically double our panel stipends. Again, keep in mind, these were only introduced in FY22. So we're talking about FY24 now. So our intent is to double those panel stipends for FY24. This will make San Diego more congruous with peer agencies. You'll see here just some work we've done and just looking at who's paying what and when. Now, everybody's panel process is a little different. The time commitments are a little different. So we kind of have to, we factor that in too. But what we are proposing and what we're planning to do is increasing the half day from 75 to 150 for participation and 150 to 300 for full day panel participation. So we'll be coming back to this group later this fall for more kind of details and conversation around panel actual recruitment. We do plan to release a call for panelists later in the fall, but we'll be talking to you all before that. And I would just add that, our intent is always to look at ways to elevate, uplift, and support not only panelists and encourage that participation, but just trying to streamline and make the application process as easy as possible. We did robust work last year, so our updates are very meaningful this year, but not as much because we think consistency is important too. So we, I think we're trying to balance that this year. A call for action for this group specifically is to help us get the word out again about that fiscal sponsor opportunity. I will share the link to that call in the chat so you can share that. Now the deadline is September 18th. So share today, share tomorrow, share Monday if you can. Additionally, when the time comes, when we do release the guidelines, we will let you know because we really want you to help with cultivation. Get the word out. If you know of a group or organization that might be interested in this funding, has a great project or has a great organization doing arts and culture activities in the city, we want to know and we want to encourage them to apply. So we'll make sure that we share that guidelines with you and you can help us promote that opportunity. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we're going to want your help in recruitment of panelists. And so we will have like a call for panelists again later this fall. And so we'll come back to you at a meeting prior to that to brief you more on that. And then we'll really want you to help with that cultivation as well. So that kind of sums up kind of what our thinking is in terms of administrative updates, and happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you, Christine. This is really great. Again, I will encourage you to speak in the chat if you are hoping to ask a question. I wanted to add to the 2 calls to action that Christine just mentioned. So besides trying to get the word out for more fiscal sponsors and definitely for more panelists, we're always sort of on the lookout for that. She did mention, you know, we're always looking for new applicants as well, right? I mean, as we really start to refine this process and our city is changing, you know, even as we are meeting right here, looking at new applicants and leveraging the boards and commissions is super cool. And I love that we're really thinking about that as well. Christine also mentioned the city council workshops, and I'll say back pre-pandemic days, those were actually really fun to attend. It gives us as policy and funding commission or committee members, excuse me, just a way to see, first of all, our staff in action, and just also see the interest from the community, who wants to know about the funding, the questions that they have. And so I'd also encourage you, looking for some nods from the staff, to also attend one of those workshops, maybe even the one for your district as well, but really just in a sense to understand better the work of this committee. And Commissioner Kim has either a question or a comment.
I think Commissioner Hughes.
Oh, I'm looking back. All right. No, thank you. Go ahead. Commissioner Hughes also, and I also wanted to ask him to speak to, he's our financial guru on this committee, to also speak to any of his thoughts on Luna as well.
Thank you, Chair. When I was looking at Luna, and yes, that has definitely been, I know, a pain for participants to request funding, and I think this is a strong change. The idea of basically a balance sheet review to get a sense of where organizations are financially. I do understand the concern about throwing up financial barriers, especially for smaller organizations, individuals who are sort of one-man bands, as it were, as well as the financial sponsor. I wonder if there is a way we can, just from a financial best practice standpoint, as organizations are getting funding, if we can, as part of the process of being funded and being within the sphere of influence of the commission, at least have discussions around building up savings and building up, you know, emergency reserves, emergency liquid reserves, from which they can draw for when there are moments of either shortfalls based on funding, based on ticket sales, or based on exogenous circumstance. I just find, you know, when talking business planning, I think building up funds, building up savings is always a good plan. And I did have a side question regarding the review and organizations disclosing a structural deficit. Are we going to be asking them about plans for addressing deficits? Is that going to be one of our requirements, that there at least be, you know, a structural deficit can be a normal thing. That can be an operating grant recognition or gift recognition that pushes you into a deficit over time, or there are those that just live on deficits and then can't live. So are we going to be addressing that at all? And then I have another question about the impact and artist categories, but I'll suspend that for the moment.
I'm happy to answer that question. So in the financial section that we still have in the application, there are questions if they do have a significant variance. Tell us why, what's about, and like you said, Tyler, organizations oftentimes it's simply, oh, okay, that makes sense. They also still have to say, well, if they have a variance, how are they going to cover that? So we ask them to better understand if they have a line of credit with a bank, or, you know, are the board commitments involved? So those are questions we do have and anticipate continuing to have to just better understand and overall health of the organization. I would also add that as far as understanding or supporting or the foundational things of running a nonprofit and being able to have that fiscal health, you know, one of the things we did last year, which we intend to do again, and we'll update you in future. Actually, I think the next meeting is supporting building capacity for organizations. And what we found last year working with RISE is that some of these foundational things for nonprofits with budgeting and financing are incredibly important and really are more of capacity building kind of support that is almost outside of this application process and really foundational for these organizations. So that's an area that we're continuing to focus on because we do understand the need in being able to support the organizations just overall, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question?
Yes, very much so, and I appreciate it, and especially the idea of capacity building. You know, that's always one of my hobby horses, and I love any opportunities where we can really help organizations go from the small to the institutional mindset.
And then Tyler, before we go on to Leanne, did you want to ask a question or comment about impact?
Well, yes, thank you, Chair. Christine, could you speak to both of those? You had said that you're going to be studying the viability of one or the other coming online in fiscal year 24. Do we have an idea of how much funding we would need in addition to make one or both happen? Because we have that mandate from City Council, is there an opportunity for us to, and us, not this commission, not staff, but us as individuals and the wider community, to hold their feet to the fire and say, if you want these categories, you have to fund them properly?
From my perspective, it's also about program design and staff. There's staff capacity. There's that question too, which we're exploring all those things to kind of balance and understand when do we bring these online and to be successful. So, you know, they are in the council policy. It means we can introduce them when we as an office are ready, when the city is ready to introduce them, and when it makes sense in terms of timing. So those are the kind of the different variables we're looking at right now to kind of determine, is FY24 the right year? And if so, when? And then, you know, just trying to understand some of those things, because we're taking on other things this year, such as you might recall, we are working on a grant management system in terms of onboarding and building that out, which will be introduced for FY25. So there's other things that we're doing, which will continue to support these programs and will be efficient in adding new funding categories in the future too. So we're kind of looking at all that.
I appreciate that. And yeah, having the greater context is always helpful. And I guess the question then for Jonathan is, because we want to do all things, we eventually want to have an impact category. We want an artist category. We want to fully take advantage of the World Design Capital status in 24. We want to really engage with the public and have an amazing cultural plan. If you were given a blank check by the city, by the mayor, and said, Jonathan, staff up the way you need to, the way you know it's needed to be done, because our staff, I don't know if my colleagues on the commission know or the wider public realize that we do more with less than almost any city our size. Our staff is amazing, and they wear more hats than a mannequin because they are doing so much. So to be able to give people work-life balance and not burn them out so that we're able to retain this amazing group of people, how many more bodies would we need to be able to really operate the way a city like San Diego should operate?
Well, thank you for that question. I appreciate the I appreciate the comments and thank you for the comparison to a mannequin. I've never experienced that before. Just to give you a little bit of context, thinking about not necessarily the size of the city, but the size of the grants program, our annual distribution is roughly similar to Los Angeles County, and more or less similar to the type of programs. They have 6 people in the funding program. And then in addition to that, they have a full-time individual who just focuses on research. So comparing that to, we have 2 positions in the funding program. We have been at 1 position for, 8 months or so. So we're, I would say safely about quarter of the staff size of what we should be,
So what's the
specifically in
total-
funding.
Okay, and the total head count, I know you've shared this with me before, Jonathan, total head count for LA's arts entity?
For the whole staff or just the funding program?
Whole staff.
Oh, gosh. Well, LA County is 36 last time I noticed. LA City is a different beast because they have Hollyhock. They have a whole real estate assets division, Watts
Mhm.
Towers.
Right.
I think it's probably more easy. In Houston, I had around 33. That would probably be comparable in size. I'm just going through my head very quickly of scale. San Francisco is probably 18 to 22, something like that.
Okay.
So we're definitely substantially smaller than other agencies, and that's before and after COVID.
Right. Right. No, that's helpful. I think the comparison is helpful. And thank you, Tyler, for bringing that up. I know we'll address staffing also in our cultural plan too, right? Because this is not just about talent, right, for the region in terms of this, but also for our staff that is doing, and I agree with you, Tyler, just amazing, amazing work, more with less. But how do we get to the levels of staffing though that are really going to make it work for us? So Commissioner Kim.
That's a quick question and a comment following up on what Commissioners Hughes and Martin had talked about. For the panelists, as someone who has served on the panel for a few years, I think it's really important for us to ensure that each panel includes folks who had served in these smaller organizations so that they can really read into the financials that are submitted and the notes that are included in those financials. I feel like those who have not had experience in the smaller orgs or in more volunteer orgs may not understand firsthand. So I just want to make sure that I comment on that. But my quick question was on the fiscal sponsors, the request for us to outreach. I'm looking on the link, Christine, that you had sent to us, and I don't see a list of the current fiscal sponsors. Is there a list of current fiscal sponsors so we can kind of just see who's on board and not? And then once they're on board, do they have to reapply each year, or are they just kind of like in this forever bank?
So really good questions. So first of all, just to comment on your first question, noted. We'll be talking a little bit more about panel composition with you all a little bit later this fall, and certainly your help in cultivating some of those smaller org folks to participate is as welcome and needed. So thank you for bringing that up. And then secondly, as far as the RFI, there was, we introduced this last year with the first RFI, and it was specifically for FY23. So I can pull that link up in a few minutes. What the intention is to check in and reapply because an organization may not be interested anymore, or or we want to introduce new organizations who might want to be fiscal sponsors. So we do have a new one this year, which if they were on that list last year, they will need to reapply. My intent is to outreach, and I have for most of them, all the people on that list, just to make sure they're aware that it's available once again. I would say maybe a handful of those organizations, fiscal sponsors actually did end up being fiscal sponsors. Some of them did not. And an organization doesn't have to use somebody on that list, right? They can go find their own fiscal sponsor too. It's just a resource in case they're struggling or don't have those connections, if that makes sense.
And then just to clarify, what's in it for the organization who is applying to be a fiscal sponsor? Is it that they get like a small administrative fee for serving as a fiscal sponsor if they're chosen by an applicant?
So, the city itself doesn't get into those kind of administrative fee negotiations. All fiscal sponsors kind of have their own fee structure. So that's something an applicant will have to kind of look at and kind of determine who's the best fit for them. But I think from our perspective, it's mission-based too. So some of these fiscal sponsors, they're here to serve and they're here to uplift these organizations who may not have that status, that 501c3 or 6 status. So we have found that a lot of them, it's mission-driven primarily.
And sorry, final question. If somebody is using a fiscal sponsor and there is some kind of administrative fee, because obviously on the organizations and there's additional work, can that fee be covered as part of the grant, or is that just something that they have to eat up themselves?
I would assume that, it is your project-based organizations, so they have to submit an itemized project budget. So, I would consider that part of administrative part of a project budget. So they can, if they're savvy and kind of think that through. I would say that, last year we only probably had between 8 and 10 fiscal sponsors. So just keep in mind, it's a small group right now. Of course, we want to support more and more. But by and large, most of them right now are 501c3s in our pool. So, but it is something for us to continue to support and think about.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. And Commissioner Kim, this is absolutely the place to ask these questions. So yes, definitely keep them coming. I noticed that Commissioner DeZenzo does want to speak, and then following that, Commissioner Martin.
Yeah, I just have one question and I can't remember it, but as a fiscal sponsor, are you allowed to sponsor more than one entity?
Yes, that was the change that we made. So, in theory, a fiscal sponsor can support more than one organization through that process.
Okay.
Commissioner Martin.
Yeah, just touching on the fiscal sponsorship concept. With my Catalyst hat on, it's something that we're committed to. And one of the things that we've observed is there are a number of smaller operations who reach out with like a 48-hour window, like, hey, we heard you could fiscal sponsor us. We're like, yo, we would love to. And it doesn't necessarily need like a month of a heads up, but we just can't do it in a day. And just for the record, we're committed to expanding our capacity to support more than one organization and like building a relationship with folks. So we would love to have like a follow-up conversation with you, Christine, about what some type of shared learning and like some of these technical assistance pieces could look like in advance as possible, so we can start to get more of these folks to start to push out that window as much as we can. And then one more piece, just kind of to dovetail on that, with all of the work that USD and their nonprofit school does every year, I think it's important to remember how small the capacity actually is. And oftentimes we fall into the trap of like capacity building for nonprofits. And I'm not saying it's unimportant, but the real capacity building is for the entities with funding, right? Like, what are the things that folks who have resources to distribute and allocate have to learn in order to do their job more effectively? And I was just looking at something from the 2021 report, because 22 hasn't come out yet. There were almost 12,000 nonprofits in San Diego. And of those 12,000 nonprofits, less than 3,000 actually had paid staff. So there are 3,000 nonprofits that actually pay people, and 9,000 where they're just doing it for the love, and they can get a little bit of money to execute the work. And that's why I think programs like CCSD or OSP are so important, because they give a chance for not just the 3, but the 9 to like do that thing that they believe is the Lord's work, and continue working, do whatever else they're doing. And I want to make sure that we can support people in a way that makes sense without trying to force or coerce them to becoming part of a structure that they're not equipped to be a part of or have no interest in opting into.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And as you are newer to our scene, I so appreciate, Kamal, your questions and comments in too, and we'll have a conversation at a later date, no surprise to anybody else, about alternative revenue streams and how do we look at different sources of funding, right? In our great region. Jonathan's laughing. He's like, oh, there she goes again. And this is where I'll say, let's talk about Tyler and the cultural plan and how do we get that all in there. So again, appreciate all your questions and your comments too. Jonathan, I noticed that you wanted to speak, but it is actually time for your executive director's report. So can I just go ahead and turn it over to you?
Oh, that's fantastic. First, I want to thank everyone for that really rich and robust conversation. Much appreciated. My comments actually were very much in alignment with Commissioner Martin's. I think you all know about a third of our grantees are also volunteer-run organizations. We really believe on the staff side that we're not in the business here of creating 501c3s. We're in the business of investing in community and advancing arts and culture. So any way that we can continue to invest or create opportunities through things like fiscal sponsorships, we'd much rather encourage organizations to go that route. Obviously, the big challenge is having a pool of volunteers that know how to do this work. But with that said, I have 2 areas that I wanted to quickly touch on for the staff report. One is the workshop that the conversation that we're co-hosting with Catalyst this coming Wednesday. Art at Intersections. If you have not registered, I hope that you do so. It will be a really interesting conversation with Eddie Torres, the president and CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts. And then secondly, California Creative Corps. I believe everybody is aware of the fact that we received a very generous grant of $4,750,000 from the California Arts Council. There is a cohort of us that are working together right now to truly define the legal and procedural structure for this grant. For those of you who may not recall, this was an opportunity through the California Arts Council that came to us very, 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 very quickly. So the application was essentially concept. Now we've received the funding, we need to put the infrastructure in place. It is a partnership between Catalyst, San Diego Foundation. The city of San Diego is the lead applicant. And San Diego Arts and Culture Coalition. Christine Jones is the staff lead on this. Over the next 6 weeks or so, we'll be working on very basics, going to city council with the grant award, creating agreements between the partners, and then the committee that is driving that, which is essentially a staff person from each of those stakeholder organizations, will be digging into calendar and basic infrastructure over the next 6 to 8 weeks. We'll come back to this group in October, November at the latest with details. Excuse me, but for now, please know we are working on it and eager to bring you more information in the following weeks. And I'll ask Christine quickly if she has any additional comments.
Thank you, Jonathan. No, I would just add that we're really excited about Creative Corps and what it can do for both San Diego County and Imperial County artists, specifically working in California Healthy Places Index locations. So this is really hopefully going to be very impactful program. So we're really excited to develop that and report back to you all later this fall. No other comments right now.
Chair Smith, there you go.
All right, thank you so much for that. There's so much good stuff going on. Thank you. So I will ask commissioners, and of course, if any staff need to chime in here as well, about possible new business for future agendas. We'll be seeing each other all again on the 23rd of September for our full commission meeting. But any thoughts on new business? And of course, if something comes up within the course of the next couple of weeks, please feel free to send us an email as well. Commissioner Martin.
On the new business front, I wanted to circle back to something I think I'd shared in a previous meeting around like creative facilities usages as relates to school district properties or other elements in this broader landscape of like building an ecosystem that supports artists and creatives, and like the intersection again of WDC. Another piece that I think is interesting is specifically the housing element, and like how do we create housing and spaces that artists can afford to actually live in and like still live in San Diego. And when I say San Diego, I mean like San Diego proper, and like not have to move to Alpine or
Right.
Jamul or Lakeside. Again, like no disrespect to those communities, but it takes artists further and further away from like the creative core and the community building elements. I wanted to surface an interesting thing that I just became aware of the other day. Catholic Charities, as the social service arm of the church, does a lot of interesting work in the real estate development space. And this past year was the state of California's largest recipient of new market tax credit allocations, which I thought was fascinating. And I had no idea they were playing in that space to such a significant extent. And the church's ability to leverage properties already owned by the church, which as per church canon, they cannot sell, but to partner with market rate developers, specifically in that 80 to 120% AMI space, could present some really interesting opportunities for expansive thinking and alternative sources of revenue. Solving for the cost of land is the biggest problem oftentimes. So if there's a way around that in working with the folks at the church, I think it would behoove us to explore those things. And for the record, Catholic Charities works with everybody, regardless of your spiritual affiliation or lack of a spiritual affiliation, ethnicity, relationship status. Like, I just think it's a fantastic opportunity to like think differently about the resources we have at our disposal within the county and what that means, but also for the role that the recent elevation of Bishop McElroy to Cardinal McElroy could mean for the San Diego, Baja California region, with Mexico still being a largely Catholic country, and the opportunity to use that platform as a trusted speaker to the extent possible to help push some other messages in this space leading up to WDC, I think is intriguing.
Very cool. We're going to start like really having some fun on this committee, right? So I've heard two, if I can distill down sort of the two items that I heard you talk about: getting creative about venues, really exploring, like you mentioned, school district sites, but also think about all that commercial real estate out there, right? I've talked to two friends in the tech space who are giving up their offices, right? Like, because they're like, we're working from wherever now. So venues and housing. And I think to your point, just there are some really creative ways. And, you know, we've never talked about new market tax credits in this scene now. And I mean, this might be definitely a time. I think if anything, the last 2 years has taught us that we can't say things like, oh, that just can't be done. Because guess what? It can, right? So thank you for that. Duly noted on venues and housing. Commissioner Hughes.
I think what Commissioner Martin just brought up is brilliant and very necessary. And I wonder if there's a way we could sort of take that ball and run with it and connect with our friends over at the Housing Commission and fold them into this discussion. I just came back from a vacation up in Montreal, Quebec. And, you know, like anybody who goes to someplace new and different, I've fallen in love and I'm just going to be an evangelical for it now. And one of the things that I had an opportunity to talk to some artists there, and they said, housing costs in Quebec, specifically within the city of Montreal, being what they are, you can actually be a working artist and live in this beautiful metropolitan area. And it was shocking. Having come from San Diego, and part of that is because they have a very strong cultural plan, but also housing plan for making sure there's affordable housing for specifically artists. And with our own cultural plan coming online and our discussions around that, I think it would be a blind spot if we did not involve housing as part of this, as well as venue usage, et cetera. But specifically, how are we going to keep livable, affordable housing for our artists within the city itself and not have to go farther afield? So I think that is well worth the discussion, and I would encourage us to make that one of our items of work.
Well, and for sure, I knew you were going to say that, Tyler, that folding that information under the cultural plan allows us to really go deep, right? And really start to research what the possibilities are, and then to present all of that information then, right, to our region to really take a look at it. There are places that are really starting to think about that. I know some of us on this call have started to have meetings with our new leadership, the new CEO at the Conrad Pravis Foundation. When I had a meeting with him, that's what he wanted to know about, was housing for artists. And so definitely something to keep talking through. Jonathan, could you speak to what you just put in the chat, since we do keep bringing up the cultural plan?
Yeah, I just wanted to, all this is in such important conversation. Cultural plan consultants should be identified and approved by City Council by the end of October. So we'll be prepared to dig into just this type of conversation with this group and the community writ large by the end of the calendar year.
Yeah, I love Christine's just very pure reaction in the Zoom room. That's actually going to be, again, a lot of fun for us to work with too. And so, yeah, and you feel like, Jonathan, we've had a chance to get some good submissions in. You feel happy about the quality and the number?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's really all I can say, but absolutely.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm not asking you to, yes, but just, right. Okay, sounds good. Checking the chat, nothing else. So at this point, I will go ahead and adjourn for us at 1:07. Please stay safe and healthy, everyone, and we will see you on September 23rd at our full commission meeting.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Rebecca.
Have a great weekend. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.